I knew something was off the moment I saw the thick envelope taped to my front door, not mailed, taped. HOA seal stamped across it like it was a warrant. Red ink, bold letters. Final notice. I ripped it open right there on my porch. $30,000 in fines for a cabin. A cabin that wasn't even inside the HOA's jurisdiction. My name's Vaughn Reddick. I'm a contractor by trade, and 3 years ago I bought a small plot of land up in the foothills outside town. Built a weekend cabin there with my own 2 hands. No one lived up there full-time, just deer and the occasional nosy hiker. Zero HOA. But I live down in Sycamore Grove, a neighborhood run by the worst kind of HOA, power drunk and bored, and their queen, Cheryl Rawlins. Mid-50s, haircut like an angry helmet, and a voice that could strip paint off a wall. HOA president for 7 years running because no one else wanted the job bad enough to wrestle it from her claws. That morning, she was already pacing in front of my house when I stepped outside, envelope still in hand. Clipboard tucked under her elbow, Bluetooth headset flashing like she was directing air traffic. "Well, Vaughn," she snapped, "you've violated the community standards on unauthorized construction." I blinked. "What are you talking about? That cabin is on private land, outside the HOA boundary." "You don't get to fine me for that. The bylaws clearly state that if a homeowner owns property within Sycamore Grove, they are subject to aesthetic and environmental compliance expectations for any developments within a 50-mile radius." I laughed. "That's not a bylaw. That's a fantasy." She shoved a stapled packet into my chest. "Page 12, Section 8. You agreed to this when you bought here." I flipped through the pages. It was all nonsense. Someone had added a clause in fine print about extended jurisdiction in what looked like a bad photocopy job. I looked up at her. "This is fake." "Then take it up with the board," she snapped, already strutting off, so I did. That night, I went to the HOA meeting. It was held in the community clubhouse, a beige box of a building with burnt coffee and folding chairs. Cheryl sat at the front with the rest of her hand-picked board. 3 retired couples who nodded whenever she cleared her throat. I stood up. "This fine is illegal. My cabin is 27 miles away, outside the HOA boundary, on land that's not even zoned residential." Cheryl folded her arms. "You're setting a precedent, Vaughn. What if everyone starts building unsanctioned properties? It reflects poorly on Sycamore Grove." Reflected poorly. "There's nobody around for miles." One of the board members, a guy named Walter who once tried to fine my neighbor for planting a lemon tree, chimed in. "It's about image." I stared at them. "You can't just invent rules and rob people. I'm not paying a dime." Cheryl leaned forward. "Then the fines will accumulate, daily." That night I couldn't sleep. Not because of the fine, I knew they had no legal ground, but because something deeper was wrong. Cheryl had forged documents. That was a crime, and I had a plan. I went to the county records office the next day. I requested the original HOA charter, the neighborhood zoning maps, and every amendment ever filed. Took me 4 hours, but I found it. The version Cheryl handed me had 2 extra pages not in the official file. Slipped in sometime in the last year. Forged. I smiled to myself. If Cheryl wanted to play dirty, I'd show her what clean and legal looked like with a vengeance. The morning after I uncovered the forged amendment, I drove straight to my buddy Levy's office. He's a municipal zoning attorney who owes me for building his sunroom last winter for half price. His office was cluttered with case files and coffee mugs that hadn't seen soap in a month, but his brain was sharper than a bench grinder. He skimmed the forged amendment for 10 seconds before snapping upright. "This isn't just a civil issue. This is criminal fraud." I leaned against his desk. "Can we prove it?" He pulled out a legal pad and started scribbling. "We don't have to. The original charter on file with the county is the only enforceable version. Anything else they distributed is irrelevant unless it was filed properly through county channels." Which this wasn't. "You think she forged it herself?" He glanced at the signature on the amendment. "That's not her handwriting on the original charter, but this is traced, badly." I nodded toward the stack of documents. Can we take it to the sheriff? He looked up. We can take it to the district attorney. That same afternoon, I sat in a small beige interview room at the county courthouse while Levy laid everything out to an assistant DA named Monica Yates. She was in her 30s, sharp-eyed, blazer that probably cost more than my truck. As Levy walked her through the forged amendments and the trail of fabricated fines, her fingers flew across the keyboard. She asked specific questions: dates, names, when I received the notice, how the document had been presented. Then she looked up. This isn't the first time we've heard complaints about Sycamore Grove's HOA. We've had 3 formal grievances in the last year, but nothing with evidence this clear. Levy slid the forged packet across the table. This is your smoking gun. She tapped her pen. We'll need statements. From you, from anyone else targeted by these fake rules. The more patterns we can establish, the better. I can get you names, I said. People have been afraid to speak up, but they'll talk if they know someone's standing up to Cheryl. She smiled slightly. Excellent. We'll open a preliminary investigation. This kind of forgery, if it was used to extract money, carries felony charges. When I left the courthouse, the air felt different, not lighter exactly. Heavier but with purpose. I wasn't just defending my cabin anymore. I was dragging a rotting system into sunlight. That evening, I knocked on the door of Marcus and Tilda, a retired couple who lived 5 houses down. Marcus answered slowly, eyes wary. You here to talk about the letter? I stepped inside and showed him a copy of the forged amendment. This is what they used to fine me. It's fake. County records don't match. I've already spoken to the DA. Tilda appeared from the kitchen. You're taking it to court, they are, but they need more stories. Proof that this wasn't just a one-time mistake. Marcus exchanged a look with his wife, then led me to a drawer in the hallway. He pulled out a folder packed with documents, warning notices, fine letters, even a cease and desist for repainting their shutters a shade too dark. We paid over 15 grand just to avoid a lien. I took photos of everything. Tilda handed me a copy of an email she'd saved where Cheryl had threatened to escalate the matter to legal channels over a rain barrel. It was gold. Within 3 days, I had statements from 11 households. Each one had been fined, threatened, or harassed using language that referenced the forged amendment. A few had even paid the bogus fines. Monica called me that Friday morning. We're moving forward. We're issuing subpoenas for HOA board meeting minutes and financial records. You might want to stay available in case we need you for follow-up. I grinned. I'll make myself real available. That night, under the hum of porch lights and the buzz of crickets, I printed out flyers. Not angry rants, not accusations, just facts. A timeline of the forgery, a list of known abuses, and a contact number for the DA's office. I slipped them into mailboxes and paper-clipped them to porch railings. Cheryl's house was last. I didn't bother with subtlety. I taped the flyer dead center on her expensive glass storm door. By Monday, the neighborhood was buzzing. People who hadn't spoken in years were knocking on each other's doors. I saw a group of residents gathered around Cheryl's lawn, talking in hushed tones. She didn't come outside. Wednesday, the subpoenas landed. The HOA board was served during a scheduled meeting. According to Monica, Cheryl tried to claim she needed time to consult legal counsel, but the deputy serving the papers didn't care. One by one, the board members were notified of the investigation and ordered to preserve all emails, communications, and financial records. Walter, the guy who'd parroted Cheryl at the last meeting, resigned 2 days later. The next week was a blur. Monica's team found discrepancies between homeowner payments and the official HOA financial reports. Several checks had been deposited into what they described as unauthorized secondary accounts. One of those accounts was in Cheryl's name. Levy called me on a Thursday afternoon. They're filing charges. I sat down on my tailgate. How many? Forgery, fraud, misuse of funds, falsifying public records. At least 6 counts. Could be more depending on how deep this goes. The local news caught wind within hours. A camera crew showed up in the neighborhood, filming B-roll of the clubhouse and Cheryl's driveway. I didn't talk to them, but Marcus did. So did a few others. The story aired that night. HOA president under criminal investigation for fraudulent fines. At the next emergency, homeowners meeting called by the remaining board members who were scrambling to distance themselves residents flooded the clubhouse. People who hadn't attended a meeting in years showed up with folders, receipts, and long memories. Cheryl didn't show. Monica sent an assistant to read a prepared statement aloud. The investigation was ongoing. A grand jury would be convened. Anyone who'd been affected was encouraged to come forward and file a complaint. By the time the meeting ended, the board had been dissolved. A new interim committee was formed on the spot, this time voted in by hand count, with a requirement to hold open books and monthly public audits. I wasn't on the committee. I didn't want to be. I just wanted my weekends back. But as I walked out of that overstuffed clubhouse, I overheard someone say, "Never thought Vaughn would be the one to clean house." I just smiled at that, not because I wanted credit, but because it meant people were finally waking up. Cheryl was arrested the following Tuesday. They picked her up at home around noon. I watched from my porch as two plainclothes officers escorted her to a black SUV. No cuffs, but she looked like someone had unplugged her from the sun. Her Bluetooth earpiece was gone, her clipboard noticeably absent. The next day, the DA's office filed formal charges. 6 felony counts, including wire fraud and document falsification. Her bail was set too high for her to post immediately. When the court date was announced, it became the talk of the town. Not just Sycamore Grove, but the whole county. A corrupt HOA president charged with felony fraud. It was the kind of story that made people believe the system might still work. I got a call from Monica 2 days before the arraignment. "We might need you to testify," she said. "You started this." "I'll be there," I said, and I would. Because sometimes, the only way to fix a broken system is to hold up the pieces for everyone to see and make sure the ones who shattered it answer for every single crack. The courthouse was packed the morning of Cheryl Rawlins' arraignment. I didn't go to see her fall. I went because I wanted to watch the exact moment her illusion of control collapsed under the weight of her own arrogance. They held the hearing in courtroom 3, which hadn't seen this kind of attendance since the county tried to ban off road vehicles on public trails. A bailiff had to open the overflow room with a live feed. I stood in the back, arms crossed, next to Marcus and Tilda, who were both unusually quiet. The kind of silence you reserve for church or justice. When Cheryl walked in, her expression was flat, like she thought if she looked bored enough, everything would just go away. She wore a beige pantsuit as if she were attending a PTA meeting, not facing felony charges. Judge Ellison, a man who had once fined a corporate developer for cutting down protected oaks without a permit, sat behind the bench with his reading glasses perched halfway down his nose. He looked over the file for a full minute, flipping pages while the room waited, then he looked up. "Miss Rawlins, you are being charged with 6 counts, including fraudulent misrepresentation and embezzlement. Do you understand the charges against you?" Cheryl answered with a stiff nod. "Yes, Your Honor." "Did you or did you not distribute unauthorized legal documents with the intention of collecting money from residents?" Her attorney, a wiry man named Denton who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, stepped in. "Your Honor, we reserve our right to respond at a later date, pending discovery." Judge Ellison raised an eyebrow. "You'll have your chance, but let's be very clear. If this court finds that you used forged material to intimidate homeowners into paying false fines, you're looking at a minimum of 5 years. That drew a ripple from the audience. Not gasps, just quiet satisfaction. Cheryl didn't react, not visibly. But her hands, clutched in front of her, had gone white around the knuckles. The arraignment ended with her pleading not guilty, but the judge denied her request to travel out of state and required weekly check-ins with the court. A trial date was set for 6 weeks out. Outside, a local reporter shoved a microphone in my face. "Mr. Reddick, you were the first to challenge the HOA's jurisdiction. What do you think of today's arraignment?" "I think it's about time," I said. For years, people in this neighborhood were too afraid to speak up. Today proves that silence isn't the only option. I didn't stick around for more questions. I had work to do. Back in Sycamore Grove, the interim HOA committee had started the process of auditing everything Cheryl and her board had touched. They invited me to one of their meetings, not to run things, but to explain how the original documents were uncovered. I brought Levy along. He knew the legal terrain better than anyone. At the meeting, held in a borrowed church hall, since residents had voted to suspend use of the clubhouse until the investigation was over, I laid out a full timeline. When I got to the part about the county records not matching the distributed documents, an older man in the back raised his hand. "I'm Peter," he said. "I was on the HOA board back in '06. We never had anything about extended jurisdiction. That clause wasn't even discussed." Levy nodded. "That lines up. The county's last certified amendment was filed in 2011. Everything after that was circulated without legal registration." One of the new committee members, a nurse named Valerie, looked up from her notes. "So what happens to the money people already paid?" Levy answered. "Once the court confirms fraudulent collection, restitution becomes part of the sentencing. It might not cover everything, but the DA's office is preparing asset seizure motions. If Cheryl or any board member profited personally, those funds can be reclaimed." There was a pause. Then Peter asked, "What about the others? Anyone else on that board complicit?" That was the real question. Cheryl hadn't forged signatures in a vacuum. 2 weeks later, the answer came. The DA's office announced 2 more arrests. One was Darla Hayes, the secretary of the former board. The other was Harold Trent, the treasurer. Turns out, Harold had been funneling payments into a side account labeled Community Improvement Reserve, which was never disclosed in the HOA's annual report. According to financial records, over $70,000 passed through that account in 3 years. None of it was used for actual improvements. They'd used the money for personal expenses. Darla's spa membership. Harold's boat repairs, not lavish but steady. Quiet theft, just under the radar. When the news broke, residents were furious. Not just about the money, but the betrayal. These were people who'd hosted barbecues, judged holiday decoration contests, handed out parking passes like they were doing you a favor. Now they were being led away in cuffs. I got a call from Monica the same day. "We're expanding the case," she said. "You started something bigger than you realized." "Good," I said. "Because this neighborhood deserves better." In the following weeks, the interim committee passed a motion to hold a full community review of the HOA's charter. It was the first time in the neighborhood's history that residents were invited to vote directly on structural changes. I helped draft the proposal: term limits for board members, mandatory third-party audits, and a requirement that all new amendments be reviewed by a licensed municipal attorney before implementation. At the final vote, held in the park under pop-up tents, the turnout was overwhelming. Over 200 ballots cast. Every proposal passed. The look on people's faces told the real story. Not relief, not revenge, just clarity. The fog that had hung over Sycamore Grove for years had finally lifted. The new board was elected that evening. Valerie won by a landslide. Peter agreed to serve as treasurer temporarily, just until they could hire a certified accountant. I was offered a seat but declined. I had my cabin to get back to. That weekend, I drove out to the foothills. The sun was just dipping behind the ridge as I pulled up to the cabin. I hadn't been there in weeks. The boards I'd stacked on the side still waited to be sanded. The storm shutters needed rehanging. But the air was clean and it was mine. I lit a fire in the pit out back, cracked open a beer, and sat in the silence. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the next punch. The fight was over. The community had taken its voice back. Cheryl's trial began 2 weeks later. I testified on the second day. So did Marcus, Tilda, and 8 others. The prosecution laid out everything: the forged documents, the fake accounts, the threats, the misuse of authority. Cheryl's defense tried to claim she'd been misled by others, that she didn't understand the legal process, that she was just trying to protect the neighborhood. The jury didn't buy it. After 4 days of testimony and 6 hours of deliberation, they found her guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 8 years in prison with eligibility for parole after 5. Harold and Darla each received 3 years and probation. Restitution hearings followed. The court ordered Cheryl's assets, including her second home in Pine Hollow, to be liquidated. A trust was set up to reimburse residents who showed proof of payment. I didn't file, I hadn't paid a cent. A month later, I got a letter in the mail, handwritten, from Cheryl. I didn't open it. I tossed it straight into the fire pit behind my cabin and lit a match. Some people rebuild by seeking closure, others by moving forward. I'd chosen the latter. As spring settled in, Sycamore Grove changed, not overnight but steadily. Lawns grew a little wilder. Kids played in the street without warnings about noise ordinances. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years started organizing potlucks. People disagreed, of course, but it was honest. No more whispers. No more fines slipped under doors. One evening, Valerie stopped by my place, holding a clipboard. "We're naming the community garden after someone," she said. "Thought you should know you were nominated," I laughed. "Name it after the people who stood up, not just me," she nodded. "We're calling it the Red Line Garden, because that's what you drew. The line they couldn't cross." I didn't say anything. Just watched the breeze push through the trees the same way it always had, quiet, steady, and free. 4 months after the sentencing, Sycamore Grove was no longer recognizable, not physically, but in spirit. The air felt less watchful, the sidewalks less silent. For the first time in years, neighbors greeted each other without glancing over their shoulders. But one last thread still dangled from the mess Cheryl left behind. It started with a letter. Levy called me on a Thursday afternoon. "You're going to want to see this," he said. His office was cluttered as usual when I arrived, but now there was a file folder sitting dead center on his desk with an evidence tag taped to the front. Inside were copies of emails obtained through the HOA's subpoenaed records messages between Cheryl and a man named Curtis Blay, a former city contractor. The name didn't mean anything to me at first, until Levy pointed to a series of invoices attached to the emails. "Cheryl hired him for grading work," he said. "Except none of it ever happened." I flipped through the pages. "These are all billed to the HOA. More than that," Levy said, tapping one. "This invoice references a permit for stormwater redirection." I scanned the line. "But Sycamore Grove doesn't have any runoff infrastructure that would need that." Exactly. The permit was fraudulent, and it was used to trigger a payout from the city's Community Compliance Fund, $42,000. I sat back. "She stole from the city." "She didn't just steal," Levy said. "She fabricated a government inspection, forged a compliance signature, and submitted fake photographic evidence to get the grant released." I exhaled sharply. "That's not HOA corruption anymore. It's municipal fraud, felony level." And it explains how she could afford those legal services before her arrest. By the next morning, Monica had the file. Within 48 hours, the district attorney's office launched a separate investigation. The city's compliance department cross-checked the permit number listed on the invoice. It had been pulled from a completely unrelated property across town. The signature belonged to a retired inspector who'd moved to Arizona 3 years prior. The hammer came down fast. Monica filed a motion to reopen Cheryl's case. This time, the charges weren't about community fraud. They were about defrauding public funds, forging government documentation, and impersonating a state official. A grand jury was convened again, and within 2 weeks, Cheryl was indicted on 3 additional counts. But that wasn't the end of it. The investigation into Curtis Blay, the fake contractor, uncovered something uglier. He wasn't just submitting false invoices, he'd been laundering the money through a shell company registered in his brother's name. The city's fraud division traced over $100,000 in compliance grants that had quietly disappeared into non-existent projects in neighborhoods with small, private HOAs, places where board presidents like Cheryl could quietly sign off on jobs that never happened. It turned into the largest HOA-linked embezzlement case the county had ever seen. Curtis was arrested in a parking garage in Fremont. His brother, Alan, was picked up the same day outside a warehouse in Stockton. When the media got hold of the story, it spread like wildfire. Fake contractor and HOA president caught in multi-neighborhood fraud ring. The city held an emergency session to review every HOA that had received compliance grants in the last 5 years. Multiple neighborhoods reported discrepancies: missing receipts, vague invoices, no visible improvements. Cheryl wasn't just greedy. She had been part of a pattern, a system. I got called in again to testify, but this time as a witness in a broader case. The prosecution didn't just want Cheryl, they wanted to dismantle the entire network. During my deposition, Monica asked, "Did you ever speak to Mr. Blay directly?" "No," I said. "Never heard his name until Levy found the emails." "Did Cheryl ever mention city partnerships or infrastructure projects?" She used to throw around phrases like environmental compliance and aesthetic integrity to justify her fines, but she never said anything about permits or inspections. She nodded, scribbling notes. "That lines up with what we've heard from other neighborhoods." She used bureaucratic jargon to sound official while funneling money through fraudulent channels. The trial for the expanded case began 2 months later. Curtis pleaded not guilty, but the evidence was overwhelming: bank transfers, fake receipts, even photoshopped images of construction sites. His brother flipped within the first week, turning over access to the shell company's financial history in exchange for a reduced sentence. Cheryl, already serving time, was brought in wearing county orange and shackles. Her posture was different now, smaller somehow. The courtroom was packed again, this time with people from 5 different neighborhoods. Marcus and Tilda sat beside me. Valerie came too, taking notes for the new HOA transparency committee she'd started. The prosecution laid it out cleanly. Cheryl had used her position to fabricate documents, approve false projects, and launder money through city grants. The total amount: over $120,000 across multiple accounts. The city's lead investigator took the stand and explained how Cheryl's forged permit had triggered a cascade of automatic approvals. No one had checked, they'd trusted the paperwork. That trust had cost taxpayers more than money. It had undermined every legitimate community trying to improve itself. When the verdict came, the judge didn't hesitate. For the theft of public funds and the orchestration of a fraudulent scheme involving government infrastructure, he said, this court sentences Cheryl Rawlins to an additional 9 years to be served consecutively. Curtis got 12. His brother received 4 with 5 years probation. After the sentencing, the city passed new legislation requiring all HOA-related permits to undergo third-party verification. Compliance grants would now be issued only after physical inspections by a certified municipal engineer. It was the kind of change that didn't just repair damage, it prevented it. Back in Sycamore Grove, the transformation continued. The Red Line Garden, named after the boundary that Cheryl had tried to cross, flourished. Children helped plant sunflowers. Residents held weekend workshops on composting and native plants. And Valerie organized monthly gatherings where homeowners could propose improvements and vote on them directly. One evening, I stood at the edge of the garden, watching a group of kids chase fireflies under the solar lights we'd installed. Peter walked up beside me, holding 2 lemonades. "Hard to believe this used to be where she banned lawn chairs," he said, handing me one. I took a sip. "Hard to believe anyone let her do it for so long," Peter nodded slowly. "I think people just forgot they had a say. You reminded them." I just didn't look away, I said. Now nobody is. The sun dipped below the rooftops, porch lights flicked on one by one. Somewhere a guitar strummed softly. There were no more clipped notices tucked under windshield wipers. No more whispered complaints. No more fake rules, fake permits, fake authority, just neighbors, and a line that would never be crossed again.